Good afternoon. I'm going to give you sketches of tectonic culture. The pace of this talk should run at 600 years a minute. I have spent the last 40 years of my life designing, making, researching, and teaching architecture. I was lucky enough to do that from the very beginning of my career. But I want to take you back to something from our recent past, the recent past of material culture of humankind. The Cathedral in Florence, which was actually started in 1296, and the form of the dome, realized by Filippo Brunelleschi at the beginning of the 19th century, was actually set in 1367. Its form is what we now describe as Gothic. Alberti championed Brunelleschi and observed that a spherical vault on a circular plan, although it is a polygon, could be built without centering. Now, the diameter of this dome, set in the 14th century, is 41.98 meters. Still impressive today, but it was a modest proposal because it's slightly smaller than the Pantheon in Rome from 1206 AD. Not bigger, slightly smaller. This project should be doable. Here we see a conjectural drawing of the flying centering and the formwork platform used by Brunelleschi. As is normal in the construction of the European cathedrals from the Middle Ages, access to the work site is through the building, through the interstitial staircases that remain today for maintenance. It's a double brick shell, and it is the outer shell that thins by over 500 millimeters. And here we see an image, a scanned image by ScanLab of this great Duomo. Brunelleschi commanded the geometry of this dome via drawings, by physical modeling. He used the acute fifth set out by 5 arcs. But interestingly, the mathematics of the structure, the statics, was not defined by humankind for another 300 years. Brunelleschi leveled the banks of part of the Arno to draw the plan at 1:1. So he wanted to understand the components at full size. So I suggest to you that this is the earliest example of prototyping architecture. He used stone chains to resist the forces. There are no buttresses, as in a Northern European cathedral, and they are a mixture of iron, stone, and timber. But the shells of this dome are made out of bricks. We understand bricks as a standard component, but here the herringbone pattern of the brickwork means that each brick is of an individual geometry. Some of them are actually triangular. He didn't have a BIM model. How did he coordinate this building site? So here we see the very symbol of humanist education of the Renaissance, and yet its form is Gothic. So I'd like to suggest to you that architecture is a language, and what fascinates the art historians, style, is merely a question of dialect. And I propose that to you humbly, and not quite in the way of Claude Lévi-Strauss, the great Belgian anthropologist. And intriguingly, the figure of the dome in Florence seems to encapsulate the whole city, as if Brunelleschi had anticipated the work of Buckminster Fuller in Manhattan in 1960. But to Scotland, to the Highlands, to one of the last railway lines built in the British Isles. Designed by Simpson and Wilson, contractor was Sir Robert McAlpine, and it was completed in 1898. In comparison, the Canadian Pacific Railway was completed in 1886. So this really is a late railway in my little island. Here we see Glenfinnan Viaduct as it was nearly complete at the turn of the 19th century. And it's an example of geomorphology. It's built of mass concrete. It is of the landscape and from the landscape and belongs to the landscape. It's not the earliest example of mass concrete in Scotland. That is an ice house in 1830. And as you probably know, Portland cement was invented in the previous century. Glenfinnan Viaduct is built of mass concrete because the local stone is schist. It's a metamorphic, friable rock, so not a good building material. Here we see the construction of the viaduct using conventional centering. And here we see a Roman aqueduct in Spain from AD 109. So therefore, the ancient Romans could have built this viaduct. They had the technology. There is nothing new in 2,000 years. The only detail is the Roman Empire did not conquer Scotland. And so to your neighbours, to America, here we see an architectural example of geomorphism. But I need to return to Hertfordshire, to a beautiful arts and crafts church, started about the same time, completed in 1902 by William Richard Letherby. It's All Saints. It was commissioned in memory of her parents by Alice Foster, née Jordan, of Boston, Massachusetts. And here we see the interior, a beautiful, almost domestic scale arts and crafts nave, but the roof is made out of mass concrete. It's a lovely composition. People say it's not eccentric. The tapestries are by Burne-Jones, made by William Morris's company, Morris & Co. And here we see the windows, which actually remind me not of most English parish churches, but of an Edwin Lutyens house. And it is an eclectic mix of new materials and locally sourced materials. And it was under the influence of Ruskin and Morris that Letherby chose to use local materials, direct labour. He used concrete under the direction of Randall Wells. Sadly, all did not go well. Wells did not supervise the project well, and the south transept started to collapse. This was solved by a wedge of concrete, which Letherby paid for himself, and he declined his fee. But do not worry about him. He's founded Central St. Martin's School of Art and Design and is Professor of Architecture of the Royal College of Art. But quickly, to continue, the importance of the arts and crafts to this symposium is if humankind as a maker is essentially set apart from the world of nature, Ruskin, Morris, and Letherby, in their different ways, tried to suggest how traditional ways of making work with the brain conceived and the hand fashioned, and they reconcile it. Maybe we have new modes of that. But I'd like to share a concern. Contemporary tectonics seems to be little more than collage. But one more thought in 1 minute. Time and technology. I'd like to suggest to you that technology from the past will persist. This is an everyday scene from my part of London. It's a delivery robot taking someone's their takeaway, and next to it is a metropolitan police horse. Humankind domesticated the horse 6,000 years on the steppes of Near Asia. So here we see 100-year-old technology and 6,000-year-old living technology. So I would commend to you in all of your pursuit of knowledge and novelty that you remember that all of the technology and all of the invention of humankind remains accessible to you today in this 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We have questions.
Oh no, they want to lie down. Really? Oh well. Shall I just go, Philip? I am available after, if anybody wants to ask me a simple question. Or a very difficult one. I do difficult questions too.
I don't know if this is simple or difficult. Do you think, looking through all this time, which is wonderful actually, I am very encouraged by your reminder. Do you think there are such things as principles of design that thread through these centuries?
I think that's entirely true, and I think all of architecture from all time is accessible to us as long as the buildings are extant, or the texts exist, or even the artifacts. You know, our understanding of civilizations is being transformed by archaeology, and I think although we do need to tackle big issues like climate change and even species extinction, and the constructional professions need to play their part, our gift to the world is that we design. You know, the world is clay in our hands. We change it. And I think not enough of the profession of the practicing architects understand how much they are participants in the future. And sometimes they answer the immediate needs called on them from their clients, whereas Charles Eames pointed out that as an architect, you have a duty of care to the wider society. And I think we need to return to a point of which we have stewardship. And actually, the original definition of ecology included humans, included people. But I think one of the things we need to change in the 21st century paradigm is actually to return our humanity into a kinship with all of our spaceship Earth, to borrow a phrase from Buckminster Fuller. And in that sense, I personally don't see a difference between invented materials and bio-inspired materials. In a sense, our agency is always important. What we should do is choose materials and design possibilities in a way that's beyond ideology and seeks to use the tools that we have to build architecture in a profoundly informed way.
I'm going to follow up on that question.
Thank you.
There was an extraordinary hinge when Dana asked Colin about the artificial, and Colin answered there was no necessary difference. Rather, it seemed to hinge on Axel's preceding question about principles and ideas and qualities embedded in the work rather than the particular circumstance of how it was rendered. At least that's how I heard that arc. Could you perhaps answer the same question, Michael? Is there something about the lack of human hand in inherited nature which is essential to tectonics, or does it actually not matter?
I think that's a really difficult question, and there are across the world there are cultural differences. We saw the rebuilding of the Shinto shrine in Japan, and the Japanese culture's willingness to sort of capture nature and have a dialogue with nature seems to be very different than perhaps the the post-Second World War paradigm. Thankfully, we've moved beyond the 1960s and the white heat of technology. And in that sense, although this is a beautiful arts and crafts church, I'm not Ruskin, to point out the obvious. I'm not suggesting that we return to the making by hand, but I have suggested that we all need a haptic past. And I think if we are using digital tools, and my practice was very early in using 3D modeling, you need to have that materiality in your own past and potentially in your own future. So I totally agree. The comment was an absolute hinge, because some people, I think even in this conference, have sounded totally Mauritian, that we've got to return to some Eden that never existed, guys. You know, the lifetime in the Middle Ages was about 40 at tops. You know, a few people made it to 70 years and 10, and lots of our kids died. You know, 20th century transformed life expectancy, and here in Canada, it's second best in the whole world. So there are things that we shouldn't give up, but there are things. Almost to borrow from Aldo Rossi, there is a lot that persists, especially in our cities. And I think we shouldn't be afraid of our cities. We shouldn't worry that half of humankind lives in cities. This happened in Britain in 1850 because of the Industrial Revolution. What we should do is become very, very good at designing cities. Now, that might need to tame forces that are greater than an architectural discourse. But that's a skill that collectively we should have, we should master, and we do need to master, or we do need to command, to say it in a less gendered way.
Thank you, Mike.